There were many things I enjoyed in life. First rays of sun hitting my face in the morning, the sound of warm rain on clear glass, the simple pleasure of reading a reasonably funny melodrama that didn't take itself too seriously, and the sense of accomplishment that came with solving a puzzle. What I really loved, of course, was drinking too much beer, pizza coated with a thick golden brown crust of melted cheese, and the rare occurrence of when attractive women smiled back at me. The last of those was, to be absolutely fair, incredibly rare, unlike my intake of beer and pizza, and the results were beginning to show. This was none of those things. Interviews had always made me cringe, and there had been many opportunities to explore my hatred of them in recent times. Course interviews, mock interviews, and now actual job interviews for actual real jobs. I hated them all equally, and with all the passion my dried up, blackened soul could manage. Making myself comfortable wasn't easy when the entire situation was designed to feel as uncomfortable as humanly possible. The chair beneath me creaked on its wonky table legs and threatened to buckle, and threats in this part of the world are to be taken seriously. Still, this interview was definitely quite different to any I'd been to before or had been prepared for. In fact, it was very difficult to imagine how it could possibly have been any more different. "Nearly ready," said the interviewer in a stoic, unemotional tone as he looked at some papers balanced on his knee. I nodded back and braced myself. People all around were glaring in my direction, which didn't help me feel any more comfortable. "Why don't you tell us something about yourself while you're setting up?" "Well," I began, "I'm no longer languishing in London, occupying a depressingly expensive and appallingly meagre flat that I still can't really afford. I made the decision to upend all that and seek my fortune in a depressingly meagre foreign country, occupying an inexpensively opulent apartment that leaves me wondering just exactly how the global economy works. I've completed my appallingly expensive teacher training course, which has changed my life and made me a much better person. I'm now qualified to shape the minds of the next generation of baristas, waiters and gas pump technicians. My fortune-seeking plans, such as they were, seem largely on track, although the tracks no longer appeared to head to quite the location I originally had in mind." There were a few chuckles from around the room. The interviewer was an older man, a man it would have been very hard to take seriously, if not professionally obliged to do so. I was very much obliged to, and still found some difficulty doing so. He was a shambling, greying mess of a thing, dressed a little too casually in formal clothes, and was sitting too formally in a casual seat. He had a mole on the side of his nose, which might have been almost invisible if not for him frequently touching it while he spoke, tapping on it as if he was proudly trying to draw attention to this glaring physical shortcoming. He was bald and had had a little too much sun. He looked like someone had photoshopped a leather face onto a baked bean. Next to him was another man. He was darker skinned, with a thick head of hair cut so short to the scalp that it made him look quite severe. He was dressed more smartly and was gazing fixedly off into the distance at a television screen or something, or equally nothing, somewhere close by it. He looked like the sort of man that if you didn't take him seriously you might regret it, and even when he frowned, there was a friendliness to it. "Paul, is it?" the boringly grey man said, looking down at a scribbled set of notes. He was smirking to himself as he read them, and that did nothing to make him look any more intimidating or serious. I nodded earnestly. I doubted it was fooling anybody. The setting, among other things, really wasn't helping. Maybe my experiences in London had left me ill-prepared for certain realities, but it was my expectation that interviews, in general, were conducted in offices with desks and filing cabinets and at least the tiniest hint of professionalism. This was a bar, with the ferocious stench of inadequate drains mixed with the over-adequate stench of ferociously cheap beer. All around us, people were going about their lives, such as they were. Some kind of sport was being lost and won on a noisy television some way off in the distance, and many other battles were being fought by the empty, soulless creatures lined up along the bar. Most of them looked doomed to never taste victory again, and the very same turn of luck had likely led them there in the first place. "Paul Band," I added redundantly. The interviewer's head looked up, and his eyes narrowed as a grin fluttered across a pair of slightly cruel lips. He looked to the other, shorter man, who flashed a grin back at him, revealing a mouthful of even, oddly too clean teeth. He looked back at me and said, "It says Bond on my notes." Whoever said the old jokes were the best clearly had never had an alcoholic uncle that turned up to Christmas parties already drunk and ready to tell you about his latest adventures. That's probably why I've always had a healthy loathing for puns and stale silly jokes in general. "No," I said, just the polite side of friendly. It's banned, not Bond. The interviewer's eyes never wavered as he asked, "Are you sure?" Why do they always ask this? A ripple of laughter broke out around the room, a polite little chuckle that infectiously spread its way about. Someone started humming a theme song. "Yeah, I'm fairly sure," I said. "It's been my name for as long as I can remember." The interviewer nodded to himself and looked down at his notes. "I don't know," he said. "I think Bond would be better." The other, darker man looked at him and frowned curiously. The interviewer pointed to his notes and asked, "What do you think?" The other man shrugged, said something incomprehensible and looked away. "He said you don't look much like a Bond to him, but looks can be deceptive." "Well," I began conversationally, "anything be better than Band, or Paul come to that." The interviewer frowned. "What's wrong with Paul? It's a perfectly fine name." He made a fair point. Was it really a bad name? "It's just a bit boring. I think most people don't like their own names." "Not at all," the interviewer said, flicking his eyes down to his notes. He touched the mole on his nose several times and huffed a breath that could be smelled from an impressive distance away. He continued, "There's Paul Kenneth Bernardo. He was a Canadian serial killer who brutally murdered 3 women." "Okay," I managed to say. The interviewer continued, "He was also a serial rapist. Does that sound boring to you?" I heard the unmistakable sound of an coming out of my own mouth as I shifted awkwardly around in my seat. This felt like more of a beginning than an ending. I guess that's something. There's also Paul Rung, Paul Denyer, Paul John Knowles, and Paul Durasul, the interviewer said thoughtfully, tension wandering off to who knew where. Now I think of it, they were all serial killers too. Sighing to himself, an expression of contentedness flashed on and then off his face. He eventually frowned and said, "That's not to imply that you're a serial killer, or a rapist." "What?" I protested. "I'm not. No. It's not a deal breaker. I don't judge what you do. So long as your interests don't interfere with your work." "Yeah, but..." I wasn't really sure what I was supposed to say to that. "Don't you think you should care about something like that? Don't you do background checks? Isn't that sort of thing a good idea when hiring people who would be serial killers or rapists to work with young children?" Whatever it was I was supposed to have said, I could be absolutely certain it wasn't that. "Not that I am one," I added. The interviewer nodded in agreement, but a little wry smile fluttered over his lips. His expression shifted slightly as, perhaps, some kind of realization dawned on him. He said, almost sympathetically, "Most of the Pauls were serial killers, but not rapists, and it's rapists we have to watch out for. Serial killers clean up after themselves meticulously, but rapists? They often leave witnesses. Very messy. I'm sure you'll be fine, just don't prey on the students." By now, the chuckles from around the bar had quite completely ebbed away into nothing, and a silent, moderately horrified hush had descended. With an almost entirely insincere smile, I said, "I'm sure that's fine then." "I think one of them was a cannibal," added the interviewer, seemingly unaware that the conversation now completely derailed. He continued obliviously, "Did I mention we supply a school lunch? As long as it isn't meat that tastes like a cross between pork and chicken." The interviewer beamed a wide smile. "You'll be lucky if it tastes like food." "Well, just as well I'm a vegetarian." Returning to an almost professional veneer, he asked, "So why do you want to work here?" A man sitting just behind him got up, wiped his hand on his well-worn red shirt and enthusiastically scratched his groin. He yelled out to the bar for a beer and then sat down heavily, slumping unprofessionally into his chair and muttering to himself. Why indeed would anyone want to work here? It's times like these I really have to question some of the decisions I've made. Well, who wouldn't? I don't mean this bar, of course, the interviewer added redundantly, pointing around the place with his pen while smirking to himself at some joke he wasn't sharing. His bar, he added, pointing to the half-drunk, or possibly half-dead local man that was languishing behind him dressed in a really filthy red shirt. "Oh, he doesn't work for the school?" The interviewer burst out laughing. "I mean in my school. Why do you want to work in my school?" Well, who wouldn't want to work in a language school in a third world country that holds its interviews in a washed out bar where there are people lying on the floor, somewhere on the spectrum of unconsciousness, anywhere between comfortably asleep, admittedly highly unlikely, to dead, not quite as highly unlikely. Fortunately, the filtering mechanism between my ears was able to satisfactorily do its job, and none of that actually got as far as my mouth. Instead, I fell back on a well-rehearsed answer from the course literature. "I'm looking for an entry-level job in a high-quality English language school. I've just finished my training and I'm looking to develop my skills in a well-proven and trustworthy educational establishment." Impressed chuckles sounded from around the room, and I had to wonder if chuckles could really give the impression of being impressed. If you didn't question your mental health at least once before breakfast, you weren't living life to the full. "Just finished your training," the interviewer said with a little scowl. With a weary rolling of his eyes, he added, "I guess you're ready to show us what a great teacher you are and dazzle us with your abilities." "No," I chuckled professionally, to the extent that such a thing is possible or likely. As it turned out, not an easy feat to achieve. Thankfully, the training came to my rescue again. "I know the real world is going to be very different from the training course. I'm just ready to start working and begin developing my skills." "Okay," the interviewer tapped his nose and his index finger slipped surreptitiously beneath his nostril as he sniffed suspiciously. "But why should I hire you?" Expectant faces were now staring at me raptly. A bit of my soul died, no doubt the first of many small pieces. The place was like a toilet filled with the splintered remains of shattered dreams, all in vaguely humanoid form. Why should he hire me? Just look at the other options. Is he going to hire one of these idiots? Swallowing loudly, I returned my attention to the interviewer and tried to block everything else out of my mind. "I'm keen," I said. "I'm really excited to begin teaching. I'm enthusiastic and I'm ready for a new challenge." The interviewer chuckled to himself. The chuckle turned into a hacking laugh that developed into a low, rumbling cough, sending little beads of saliva spraying all around the room. "A challenge," he said as he began to recover a little of his composure. With a little splutter, he added, "This is certainly going to be that, all right." By now, I was starting to wonder if the interview was actually going the right way. One thing was certain, and that was it couldn't have been going any worse. An older man stepped up beside me, swaying very gently. He was tall, incredibly thin, and was wearing a sleeveless net t-shirt that made it look like he was some sort of monstrosity that had been accidentally caught by someone while they were out fishing. He had an almost perfectly round belly jutting from beneath a chest that had no other features than his own yellow-grey beard that was resting upon it. He said, croaking with a subtle Australian accent, a beer in one hand and a lit cigarette in the other, "Why do you want to teach?" Flustered, I said, "I always wanted to work with children." "Bloody weirdo," the man huffed loudly, waving his beer around until a little of it sloshed out. "Children are the devil's work." Satisfied no doubt that his point had been made, he staggered off back to the bar. The interviewer just gazed at his notes, ignoring the exchange completely. "I guess anyone can just walk through when you have your interview in a public place," I ventured. The interviewer frowned curiously. He pointed a chewed-up pen at the Australian and said, "Well, it's a Saturday. A head of English doesn't officially work today. He's just helping out with the interviews." "Head of English?" I repeated, hanging my head slightly. "I'll tell you what I'm looking for," the interviewer began with a weary sigh. "I need a teacher to work on grade 4. My last one finished for reasons I don't really want to go into. It's not like the school is cursed or anything. Sometimes people just die. It's what people do, sometimes." I raised an eyebrow. At least this sounded a bit like a positive development when all was said and done. It had to mean the awkward questions and outright bizarre comparison to criminals of dubious renown, and the even more dubious assistance of the apparent head of English, might be behind us. "I think I could handle grade 4, I said thoughtfully. The interviewer looked me up and down as if noticing me for the first time. He nodded to himself and scribbled a note lazily. He turned up and looked away wistfully into the distance. After a moment, I followed his gaze and felt certain he had staring lovingly at a frothing glass of cold beer a customer had just been served. The customer himself looked as if the effort of picking it up might bring on a heart attack. I snapped back, forcing myself to look away as someone at the bar appeared to have been bitten and accusing fingers were pointing at the head of English. "And what experience do you have?" "Well, I have just completed the foreign language training course with Borderline English, and that included 20 hours of in-class experience with a supervisor from my instructors." The interviewer grimaced to himself and had the look of a man who was trying not to look, as if he wanted to smile but wasn't trying very hard. "So you've got theoretical experience," he said with a knowing and slightly condescending smirk. "I'm sure that will come in very handy when the kids are asking about splitting infinitives, conjugating verbs, and why Mummy was making happy noises with Uncle Bob." "I do accept that there's a difference between actual experience and theoretical practice," I began. "Good," the interviewer snapped, ending the beginning entirely. There was a certain degree of scowling involved. Eventually, the interviewer sat back in his chair and said, "Well, there's no point asking any more about your theoretical experience, as we both know how much good that would do. I have a better idea, though." "Well," I said thoughtfully, "I could tell you a short story."